Hello, everybody. This is an impromptu episode of Difficult Conversations that was brought about by the recent tragedy in Memphis that involved the vicious attack and subsequent death of Mr. Tyre Nichols. So I'd like to just begin with a quick moment of silence for Mr. Nichols. All right. So over the past few days, I've kind of trying to wrestle with this and about what the best way to address this is with those of you that that follow Supply the Y and have supported us. Uh, I figured the best way to do this, instead of say maybe typing out a statement, would be to make myself available if people have questions, comments, or concerns. Um, I figured the best way to address it, the most courageous way to address this tragedy, would be to make myself available for up to a half hour. So if we're here for 10 minutes, we're here for 10 minutes, 15, however long it takes for people to ask questions, to share their thoughts on what took place. So let me first begin by saying this, um, unequivocally, without any hesitation, that was one of the most heinous things that I've ever witnessed. It it didn't seem like there was any law enforcement purpose whatsoever in that encounter. And I'm going to sum it up quite simply like this: it was nothing more than a gangland beating. That's what that looked like to me. There was no professionalism. Um, there were very little tactics, and the energy and intensity of those officers right off the bat. It just doesn't match up to any kind of traffic stop or anything that I've ever heard of with 18 years in this line of work. So my heart goes out to the family of Tyre Nichols, to the city of Memphis, uh, to to the good police officers in Memphis that now have to pick up the pieces that were left by these five individuals. I will not call them police officers. I will not refer to them as anything other than individuals that have tarnished the badge to a point that is I don't know how long it's going to take to rebound from the damage that was done by these five individuals. So I want to open it up. If anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to add anything, share their thoughts, even vent about what happened, I am more than willing to listen. So if you are on LinkedIn, this is on my Supply the Y page. It is not on my personal page. We are on Facebook, both my personal and my Supply the Y page, and of course YouTube. So again, any thoughts, concerns, anything like that regarding this incident, please go ahead and throw them in the chat. All right, I will address one thing that came up earlier when I was having the discussion. Um, One of the things that came up earlier is why second degree murder as opposed to first degree murder. Uh, I would say the simplest way to look at it, again through the lens of a police officer in Massachusetts, is um, and the main differences between first degree and second degree is: first degree, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was a plan. So you would have to be able to prove that, essentially, that those individuals went to work and targeted Mr. Nichols and said, "This is what we're going to do to him if we encounter him," and that would be a difficult burden to prove at this point, based on what's come out so far. I don't know if there's more to it. I don't know if there is a personal element in this. I mean, something as horrific and as inhumane as that was, looked like there was a personal element to it. So I don't know. I'll be standing by to stand by to see if anything comes from that. So we have a couple people in the chat. So Mike wants to know what are the things that I feel may have prevented or mitigated the situation, be it culture, supervision, etc. Mike, I think that it is it's a mishmash of things. It can be several different things. You have to believe based on, again, the intensity and that those officers brought to that situation right off the bat, that I wonder what kind of supervision they had, if anybody that was in charge of these individuals uh, knew how they were operating on the street. um, let's call it what it is. I mean, it's a dangerous job. They were charged with dealing with violent street crimes, things like that. And anybody who's had any time on knows that there's a time for intensity and everything, but that was certainly not the time, based on what I've seen in the videos and everything that's been reported. So I would say that supervision was certainly an issue, and I'm not sure what sort of culture was promoted within that unit, um, as far as what type of intensity was encouraged or tolerated. But it was certainly well beyond the control of anything that I would have um, tolerated or liked to see. So I hope that answers the question. All right, Kaisha. Um, Hey, Dean, thanks for doing this. I'm so disgusted by this incident. Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm numb. I'm hurt on a lot of different levels. So if I could talk a little bit about some of the different levels that I'm hurt on. So the obvious one is as a police officer. Um, I'm hurt because we go to work every day, and we're guided by our moral compass, and we're trying to do the right things in this line of work. And the unfortunate part about this job is, I live and work hundreds of miles away from Memphis, and yet people that I've known my whole life and people that have never even been to Memphis are going to inevitably going to hold me and other police officers in Massachusetts accountable for something that clearly we didn't have any control over, and has nothing to do with how we police in this part of the country. But it's just the way things go when incidents like this happen. I am disgusted as a man of color. I have to believe, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. I stayed in law enforcement because I saw that there was a need for advocacy in the Black community. There was a need for procedural justice and fairness. Before I was a police officer, I've spoken about it. If you've watched any of my other content, I probably spoke about some of the incidents that happened to me, that were negative police interactions when I was young, where I was clearly targeted and clearly treated differently than some of my white counterparts that I was with at the time. And I certainly had a lot of positive interactions as well. But I knew that if I needed to, if I wanted a change in the culture, that I had to be part of that change. And I've dedicated 18 years of my life to contributing to that change. So I feel betrayed on that front. I feel betrayed as a father. I think that I have to believe that some of those individuals had to be fathers, and to think that you could act in that manner to somebody else's child, based on somebody being what I would consider to be mildly um, uncooperative. I mean, that was nothing exceptional, nothing that most police officers haven't dealt with hundreds of times over. And again, to take it to that level is crazy. So yeah, I'm feeling a bunch of different things from a bunch of different ways. Mike says, I feel as though the culture of that unit made that behavior encouraged. I would say right on to that. I mean, clearly that was not the first time that they brought that type of energy and intensity to a call. So I think that um, that clearly had something to do with it. And that goes back to what you also brought up to that supervisory piece. You wonder what kind of supervision that unit had. All right. So Deb says, I couldn't have expressed my feelings for this any better than you did. It was a disgusting act that never should have happened. Yeah, right on, Deb. It definitely shouldn't have happened. I'm sure that that somebody's watching, though you might not put it in the chat, you might not ask, but we have to ask about what could have been done to prevent that. And the answer is I'm not sure. I've worked for several different police departments, and all have extensive background checks, and you have psychological exams. I've worked for a department that even went as far as the polygraph, and still, you still have people in each one of these departments that clearly haven't done anything to this degree, but you have people that don't always live up to the promise that we make when we accept a job and when we take our oath. And I'm not sure what kind of testing, what kind of um, things can be put into place to truly measure what's in the heart of a human being. I don't know what's in place to do that, but I know that we have to keep trying. We got to keep doing more to try to maybe some early intervention type stuff when we know that an officer is heading down this path, and we can head them off. And if it's retraining that'll work, then we do retraining. If retraining happens and it continues, then we need to separate these people from service, and we need to do it quick, and we need to do it clean. All right. So Kaisha's back. She says, "Gosh, I can't agree with it more. It feels like a betrayal on so many fronts." 100%. And if you feel up to it, Kaisha, if you could just maybe put a way or two that you feel betrayed in the chat, I will certainly put that out there if you feel comfortable doing that. Mike says, it is rumored that many, if not all, the officers were hired differently outside of the traditional ways. So that brings up problems on a lot of different fronts, mainly from a liability standpoint for an agency if you don't have standards that apply to everybody during your hiring processes. It has to be as similar as possible. Again, it's like anything else. People like snowflakes. Not there's no two that are alike, but the general bones and structure of the hiring process, it has to be consistent. So people can't call you into question, because again, 99% of the time it's probably going to work out just fine. But then you have an incident like this, and people are going to be pulling at the strings of every little step that led to those individuals having police powers. So we'll see how that all plays out. All right, Kaisha says, do I think that the crime suppression units are inherently problematic? There's a need to target crime, but I have seen too many instances where these units become fringe. That's a good question. Again, this is one of those things, Kaisha, where I think a lot of different things can be right at the same time. I've spent time in specialized patrol units like this, where we were charged with addressing crimes that required maybe a different kind of police officer, where you're dealing with people that commit crime with a higher level of intensity and a higher level of danger, and you can't. I mean, if we're being honest, you can't just put any old cop out there to deal with that. But we also were supervised, and we also had people to answer to, and we were trained, and we had to explain ourselves, and there were things in place to keep things from really ever getting to this point. And again, nothing's perfect, but it's hard to get to that point when there are checks and balances in place, and you have strong and proper supervision. So yeah, I don't know if it means that all of anti-crime type units should be disbanded. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, because again, this is one instance in one city. This isn't something that seems to be happening widespread across the country, but I'm open to the discussion on it if people feel another way. All right, Jackie says almost any other profession would be immediately terminated at the first time they showed force. I would lose my state license as a mental health professional and would never be able to be a helper again. We can't let brotherhood or unions keep bad apples employed. I agree with you, Jackie, to some degree, but we also have to keep in mind that this is a different job. I mean, police officers, we are charged with dealing with the problems in society that other people's can't or are ill equipped to deal with. And sometimes dealing with those problems involves the use of intensity and force, but it has to be controlled, it has to be measured, and it has to be balanced. And there was none of that in these videos, none of that whatsoever. And again, I'm a defensive tactics instructor, and I've been doing that for quite some time. And part of the reason why I decided to do that because I was passionate about making sure that when force has to be used, and there's just no other way, that it needed to be done correctly. It needed to be done fairly, and again, it needed to be when it was over. It needed to be ended right as soon as the situation was in control. And that situation was out of control from the beginning, and it was out of control because the officers, were, the individuals, were out of control. So yeah, so good point there. All right, Mike says, great point, Kaisha. However, I strongly feel that specialized units are useful, but they must be staffed with strong leadership. Uh, Good point, Mike. Thank you, Neil. Appreciate you for checking this out. All right, Jackie's back. She says, and we have to help. We have to help the helpers. You all see horrific things, rotating partners and positions, and having mindfulness and self care options woven in and not just sent to talk to someone when something is really bad. So, Jackie, I think again, like as a police leader, I'm certainly open to have that conversation because there is no perfect solution. Everybody handles the traumas that we see differently. Some people internalize. Some people they have good and healthy coping mechanisms. They maybe they involve their significant others. There's many different ways they exercise. They do whatever it is they need to do to be able to handle these things, and maybe looking at mental health differently and making sure that there's more regular check-ins, whether there's trauma or not. Maybe there's something to that. Um, but again, there's no perfect solution, and I think that there's going to be a lot of leaders, police leaders across the country, that are going to be open to having this discussion about what different ways we can put in place in order to prevent some of this stuff. All right, Kaisha, let's talk about the swift action by the police and how. All right, looks like that got, I'm assuming, and how quickly that police chief reacts. Yeah, kudos to that chief for she did a wonderful job of coming right out, denouncing the actions, and taking swift actions to make sure those individuals were stripped of their powers and taken off the job. That takes. I don't think people realize that's not as easy as people think when you're dealing with unions, when you are dealing with different levels of due process. But I think in this case, it was, the evidence was so compelling that that I think that I support what that chief did 100%. And again, I admire her courage and her and her drive to go ahead and get that done. So good point. All right, John Hamelberg. All they had to do was cuff him. Agreed. I mean, we're talking five trained police officers at the time against one individual that, I mean, he was slight. There was nothing exceptional physically about Mr. Nichols, where five, decent sized law enforcement officers with time on, and I have to believe if they're in the specialty unit, they've probably gotten some advanced training, should have been able to take him into custody, even if he was fighting hard, which he most certainly was not doing. So I don't understand why it needed to go to the level it did, unless there was something more to it. Deb says, how does the departmental deal? How does the department deal with the officers left to handle the trickle-down effect? I think you deal with it by saying, I think you have to. do what we're doing here. We got to have the discussion. And that chief, I'm sure, is having discussions with all different levels of her staff. And I think that the good police officers and good middle level supervisors need to make sure that the message is one across the agency. Whereas that swift action taken by the chief was in the best action of all those people that are left to deal with the aftermath. And I think that that is the message going forward. Like, listen, we don't tolerate this. This is why we acted so swiftly. And oh, by the way, if anybody else acts this way, you're going to be done the same way. And I think that that's a great start. And I think that the people that, again, that do the job the right way, that do the job with morality and humanity, will appreciate that. All right, Neil says these special units are a direct result and answer to the community's needs. Dean is right. With proper supervision and following policies, they are effective. Yeah, I believe in most cases they are. But again, there's always that opportunity. There's always that one person. It's a human factor, right? We can't measure what's in a person's heart, where somebody maybe takes a little bit of that power or that extra specialized, whatever you want to call it, that they're given, latitude that they're given, and they go off the rails with it. But again, I think it starts with effective supervision. All right. All right. So Kaisha says, you asked how I felt betrayed by this incident. You alluded to it. Being a black police officer, I've stayed for the sake of being that too often needed check and balance. Their actions sought to discredit the additional burden and responsibility of being black and blue. That's right on. So um, I'm going to address what I'm going to say here to my white friends, my white police officers, brothers and sisters that I've worked with, people that I've connected with over the years. There is a little bit of a different burden being a person of color than I see some of my white counterparts having to deal with. In that, typically when you are a black police officer, you don't typically get the same support that a lot of other people get. I know that when I first got in this line of work, I know that my parents were concerned. I know that this was not something that they wanted for me for a number of different reasons, and part of that is there's a built. All right, bye, son. I love you. There's a deep built-in distrust of police in the black community, and then you have events like this happen, and you understand, and you can understand why. I mean, even myself growing up, I've talked about how I grew up and I was a teenager when Rodney King happened, and I had that same mistrust in law enforcement, and that's why I didn't get into law enforcement until I was in my late 20s, because I was so hell bent against being part of law enforcement that I couldn't see the forest through the trees. And incidents like this, all it does is compound that feeling of distrust. And I think it probably even makes it worse because the individuals that perpetrated this heinous crime were also black. So I think this is hurtful on so many different levels that it's hard to quantify. What else do we got? Anybody else have anything? And again, I apologize. This isn't I didn't do my normal setup. I wasn't in my little makeshift studio like I normally am. I wanted this to be I'm in my living room, like how I started with Supply the Y a few years back. This is a Sunday, and I'm usually just spending time with my family and trying to recharge. But I felt it was important to put that on pause for a second to speak to this and to do it in a way that I think is a little different than what a lot of folks are seeing from law enforcement across the country. I didn't just want to write a statement. And again, no disrespect to anybody that did that. I just didn't want to write a statement and not give people the opportunity to be heard. I think that that's the most fair way to do this. All right, so we have one more comment. All right, so Neil says there's definitely a bigger burden for black officers, the constant balance between profession and culture. Yeah, it's a heavy balance. I think if you are doing it right, I think that a big part of being black and blue, we'll use that term that Kaisha used, is that you are there to advocate for people that can't always advocate for themselves. You're there to make sure that there's procedural justice wherever you can. When sometimes, and again, I don't think it's always conscious, but sometimes if you haven't experienced this firsthand, or if you haven't been touched by the kind of pain of being in a submissive position by somebody who holds power over you, and maybe they've gone a little too far with that power. Um, it's hard to understand, and there's certainly white people that have had that happen to them. This is not an exclusive to the Black community. It just I think most people would agree it just kind of seems to manifest itself a little bit more in the Black and brown communities than it does with other folks. But again, it's definitely not exclusive. I don't think I'd have to look very far to find people of different races that have also had things like this happen, or abuses of power have happened. Anything else? All right. Well, folks, I just want to thank those of you that decided to jump on and share your thoughts. I appreciate you. I hope that you found this helpful. For people that might not have been able to, or might not have been ready to have this discussion, please feel free to share this. Anybody that's ever reached out to me knows I'm as accessible as my schedule allows me to be, and I'm more than willing to have these conversations with people. And allow people the freedom to ask questions in a safe space, and know that even if you ask something that you might feel might be a little offensive towards law enforcement, or towards me as a man of color, that I'm willing to have the conversation with you. If we, as long as we can keep it in a somewhat respectful level, I'm more than happy to have the conversation, because it's the only way we're going to heal from this. It's the only way we're going to be able to move on from this. And as much as I hate to say this, it's the only way we're going to learn from this horrible tragedy, because we do need, there's clearly more that has to be learned about being humane on the job, and being fair on the job, and just being a professional. All right. Well, folks, thanks again. Deb, thank you for I appreciate you joining in, and Mike, as always, I appreciate your support. Tomorrow night, we're going to be live. We're going to be back with our live shows. We have Moshe Cohen coming on, and he's going to be talking about negotiation strategies, and ways that you can have the difficult conversations of trying to get more money in your position, and for embarking in conversations that people tend to shy away from. So see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Take care. #SupplyTheWhy.